Hello, this is week 8 for AI, Robots, and Ethics. And this week we are advancing our discussion or our conversation about machine ethics and the inclusion of the machine in moral consideration by moving beyond the binary moral agent, moral patient scenario that we've looked at for the last several weeks. As you know from our early work this semester, there is a way of defining the moral relationship in terms of the relationship between two players, the moral agent on the one hand and the moral patient on the other hand. The moral agent is the originator of a moral decision or a moral action. And we talk about the responsibilities that accrue to the moral agent and therefore define various forms of moral thinking that try to articulate what this moral agent should do or not do in various circumstances. So the standard ways of thinking about ethics generally are organized around the question of agency, whether it be virtue ethics, whether it be consequentialism, utilitarianism, or even deontology. The other side of the equation is the moral patient. This is the recipient of the action or the recipient of the decision made by the agent. Moral patiency really is an idea that is sort of hidden in moral philosophy for a long time. We mostly have focused on agency, and the patient has sort of been left to the sidelines. With animal rights philosophy, the moral patient begins to take center stage. In fact, remember from Jeremy Bentham and the people who come after him, like Peter Singer and Tom Regan, who think about animal ethics and animal philosophy. The idea is not that animals could be moral agents, but rather they could be harmed. They could suffer, they could feel pain, they're sentient, and therefore we need to take their welfare into consideration. That is an argument for moral patiency. That is, we're looking at the recipient of the moral action. And a lot of animal ethics and environmental ethics uses a moral patiency approach to things. So for the last several weeks, we've been looking at the machine question from the perspective of both moral agency on the one hand and moral patiency on the other hand. And we've seen some good opportunities from both perspectives, but also some challenges and some problems. Neither of them, I think as we've seen in our readings, is entirely satisfactory for defining the moral standing or lack thereof for machines. This week, we want to turn our attention to some alternatives. That is, we want to start to think otherwise about moral standing and the mechanisms of moral philosophy and whether or not machines and robots have a way of factoring into moral consideration. And we're going to have 2 weeks in which we deal with these sort of alternative theories of moral inclusion that could fit well for robots and AI. The first thing we're going to look at is a development by a guy named Luciano Floridi, who is a philosopher from Oxford University. And he has really developed this brand new area of philosophy called information philosophy. And part of this is the ethics of information, or information ethics, i.e. as he calls it. So the piece that we're going to be reading this week is his fundamental first effort to define information ethics. It comes from 1999. It was published in the Journal of Ethics and Information Technology. And it's a very nice, short, concise sort of case for this information ethics idea that he comes up with. For Floridi, that's hard to say. Information ethics is what he considers to be a patient-oriented, ontocentric theory that can include everything. In other words, he wants to describe the widest possible circle of moral inclusion by defining a new kind of patient-oriented ethics that is not anthropocentric, that is not animocentric, that is not biocentric, but ontocentric, which means the center of the circle of inclusion is defined by whether something is, has been, or will be. And the only thing really left out of information ethics is literally nothing, because the ontocentric theory of information ethics is designed to include everything. So this is a radical form of patient-oriented moral thinking, and it really endeavors to create a totalizing universal inclusion that sounds incredibly useful and progressive. So what I want us to do this week is look at Floridi's proposal, ask what its advantages are for describing a new way of moral thinking, but also ask critically, what problems might this have when it comes to defining the moral inclusion or exclusion of machines and technology. And that way we'll begin to sort of grasp the possibilities that information ethics makes available to us and begin to evaluate whether or not information ethics as a patient-oriented approach to thinking about moral inclusion is going to give us exactly what we need or want with regards to thinking about technology, artifacts, and machines. So that's all I have. Enjoy the reading. I think you'll find it very interesting. It follows, I think, directly from what we were doing last week. I know I mentioned briefly information ethics in the latter part of the reading we had for the previous week, and this is just going to extenuate and continue that discussion and really push it to its extreme limit so that we can begin to see what Floridi is proposing with regards to this ontocentric theory of moral inclusion. As usual, I've given you questions to guide your reading. Please look at the questions before you start the reading and record your responses to those questions in your diary or your reading journal. And we'll use those again when we meet in January and have the 2 weeks to talk about this in person and sort of really probe this in much greater detail. So that's all I have. Have a good week, and I'll see you in a week's time.